going on, football fans? It's me, J.R. Clark, back again with another rendition of the Pound for Pound. More of a Falcon Eye view this time around, or you could even really call it a think tank. Either way, we got a lot to unpack this time around, and a lot of things that I want to get to and talk about. But before we get into any of that stuff, I kind of want to give a little bit of a PSA. I've been involved in a lot of group chats here lately, and interacting with people on social media or the folks who've left comments underneath our videos or whatnot. In light of all that has transpired over the past few weeks with this team, I feel like it might be a good time to remind some of y'all that if you're going to look for the negatives, you're going to find them. And what I mean by that is there's no such thing as a perfect football team. There's no such thing as a perfect situation anywhere around. And if you go looking for it, you're going to find bad throws, bad plays, and things to ultimately be upset about as far as this team is concerned. And I think that's true to be said for just about any team out there. So it's your choice whether you want to look for the negatives or if you want to look for the positives. Me, myself, I tend to trend towards an optimistic fan, which I'm sure y'all have noticed if y'all have been watching me on this channel or any of our guys on this channel for quite some time. We tend to trend more towards the optimistic side. So I hope with this video that I'm going to bring you some potential optimism for this season. So without much further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it, because like I said, I got a lot to unpack. After we hired Arthur Smith, it became like a major talking point about how much we were going to be using 12 personnel, which it seemed to be a common denominator or a common formation that Arthur Smith liked to use in his time up in Tennessee. So as I got to thinking about that, I was thought to myself, okay, why? Why was he using 12 personnel so much? Was it just because of his roster? Was it because that's what he liked to do? Trying to find tendencies as we do with these new coaches, or find tendencies that we do with when we look at new players. So I have, a lot of information for you, and hopefully this will help clear up. Now, initially, I thought that maybe, didn't necessarily use 12 personnel as much as he was being attributed, because I thought it sounded more like just a talking point to me. So I kind of set out to disprove it, I guess you could say. But in fact, as you do a lot of times when you set out to disprove something, a lot of times you can end up proving it. So, needless to say, 2019, Arthur Smith used 12 personnel 29% of the time. So for those who don't know, 12 personnel is a 2 tight end set. That was the big thing that Arthur Smith was being, touted for. So it was something that, I wanted to look into. So in 2019, it was 29%, and in 2020, it creeped up to 35%. So hovering right around the 30 percentile time, he was in a 12 personnel package. Okay, so now let's talk about what he was doing in that 12 personnel package. In that 12 personnel package, as most of you probably know, a 12 personnel package tends to set up for the run. And you think to yourself, oh, well, JR, of course, they had Derrick Henry up there. That's a running formation. You would use that and do that with Derrick Henry. And you're right, to an extent, because in 2019, they passed 37% of the time out of that formation and ran 63% of the time. But the interesting part is that they had a 50% success rate out of those formations in pass and run. So part of me wants to think that, man, if we were doing pretty good there, as Arthur Smith seems to be wanting to do, he tends to strike balance, or at least tries to strike balance. So in 2020, that rate that went from 37% pass rate to a 44% pass rate. Now, why is that such a big deal? Because he was having success out of that formation, whether he was running it or passing it. So you can say, oh, JR, well, of course he was. He's having to, the teams are having to respect Derrick Henry. That may be the case. I don't have any data to disprove that, so that's a theory that you could very well go with. But what it shows me is that 35% of the time that they were in 12 personnel, out of all the snaps, 44% of that time they were throwing the ball, because he was able to get some really good formations out of it, or because of the 2 tight end sets that he liked to run, you could run multiple formations within that set, right? Toby did a real good video on the 3x1. Now, there were times he was doing that out of the 12 personnel. He would have Anthony Fisker in line, Jonnu Smith out wide with, the couple wide receivers, like him being one of the 3 in a bunch set. So the creativity that he was shown using the 12 personnel was something that I noticed in doing my research. And I want to show you something right here, the first of my graphics, right? It is, okay, so check this out. Here's your typical, 2 tight end set. But this time there isn't a running back, right? So I don't know if you necessarily call this 12 personnel. The running back may have been split out wide. I forgot to look and see if there's a running back in this formation. But if you notice, Jonnu Smith, number 81, is lined up right next to Ryan Tannehill. And 86, Fisker, is in the slot. Okay? So that right there shows some creativity that we might not, or that we're not necessarily used to. Now I'll show you the next one here. This is the result in that same formation. In that formation, once it broke, Jonnu Smith goes out, running a route out of the backfield, and Fisker, from his slot position, is coming across the middle. Both of those guys were wide open. And now in this particular play, Tannehill went for Jonnu Smith for I think it was about a 6-yard gain. But he could have easily led Fisker and got a big gain himself. So that right there speaks to the creativity that Arthur Smith has and has shown with the 2 tight end set, or the 2 tight end formations, however you want to call it, the 12 personnel, whatever you want to say, is having both tight ends on the field. So now that got me thinking of something else, right? I'm going to throw this, is the tight ends that we have here, how do they compare, right? Okay, so here is our 2 main tight ends and Tennessee's 2 main tight ends from 2020. Now, obviously, Jonnu Smith is up in New England, but I think the Titans still have Anthony Fisker. Now, I'm not sure if you can like read the numbers on here, but you can see this graph, and that's their athletic score metric, okay? And the ones I want you to look at is how similar Hayden Hurst and Jonnu Smith are. Now, what I mean by that is that both of them ran around a 4.6 40, and both of them have a pretty high speed score according to playerprofile.com, which is where I have pulled these metrics from. Now, Jonnu's better in their burst score, but they're pretty similar in their agility score and their catch radius. Jonnu's a little bit better, but they're on the same tier. So Tennessee's number 1 tight end is on the same tier as Atlanta's presumed number 2 tight end. Now you start comparing Hayden Hurst to Anthony Fisker, and on paper, he's a far better and far more capable tight end than Anthony Fisker. Now you start comparing. Now, granted, he's just a rookie, but if you look at the metrics of Kyle Pitts, he's head and shoulders above the rest of them, all across the board. Now, it's going to remain to be seen whether he's going to be able to put it together or not as far as the pros are concerned. But I really believe that the ability that Kyle Pitts brings is going to transform the dynamic of the 12 personnel here in Atlanta, along with the dependability that Hayden Hurst showed last year with his 88 targets, 56 receptions, 571 yards, and 6 touchdowns. He had a catch rate percentage of 63.6%. So he caught almost 64% of what was thrown at him. So, and he converted 35 first downs. So for all the people who are out there who are wanting to just dismiss Hayden Hurst as a viable part of this offense, especially because they decided not to pick up his 5th-year option, I think are selling Hayden Hurst short and what he brings to the table, especially when he's paired with Kyle Pitts. Now, everybody wants to bring up Hayden Hurst's blocking. Now, I don't believe he was asked to block a ton by Dirk Koetter, but in the run game, which is where he's going to be asked to do a lot of work, he had 4 blown blocks out of I think it was well over 100 snaps in the run game, and only had 1 blown block in the pass game. So I believe if asked to refine that, I believe he could get back up to the league average blocking that he had when he was in Baltimore. When it's not emphasized, you tend not to care much about it, right? And I just don't believe that Dirk Koetter really emphasized him actually, doing blocking. But he will be required to do that, and if he wants to earn a second contract here in Atlanta, he's definitely going to step that up. Same thing with Kyle Pitts. And I believe the versatility of both of those guys is going to potentially make for a very dynamic offense and very dynamic position group for sure. So let's get into some more of the interesting things that I noticed in my time researching this particular topic. So speaking of Kyle Pitts and what he brings to the table, this is the part where Toby talked about that 3x1 that I think Kyle Pitts is going to have a major impact. This is his lineup, where he lined up while he was in college at Florida. He lined up 12 times out wide, 12 times in the slot, 19 times in line. I don't think he's going to be lining up a ton in line for us. I would imagine that he is going to be in the slot or out wide more than being a traditional inline tight end. I could see that inline being more of a 12 and the slot being more of a 19. And the reason why I say that is because in Tennessee, there was Fisker and Smith combined for a little over 200 snaps, in the slot. I believe that's correct. Yeah, 200 some odd snaps in the slot, both of them. And Hayden Hurst last year combined for over 200 snaps in the slot by himself. So I don't necessarily, if we're maximizing what these tight ends bring to the table, I don't believe that lining them up strictly in line more times is going to be the way to maximize both of their talents. Let's see. So with that being said, another thing that I want to kind of transition into, obviously pairs up with the loss of Jones. I'm not going to spend any time on that, but he had a lot of snaps that you're going to have to now, that are now freed up to go to different parts of this offense. And I think the 2 tight ends, Hayden Hurst and Kyle Pitts can really benefit, or going to benefit, not can. I think that they're going to benefit from the absence of Jones. They're going to have to soak up some of those targets. And if we look at this quarterback heat map that I got right here, Tannehill versus Matt Ryan, like they both lived at throwing in the middle of the field. And the yards after contact, or yards after the catch rather, is something that Arthur Smith really built his offense around in Tennessee. And I think that's something that will carry over here. And I believe that Hayden Hurst and Kyle Pitts will be major benefits of the yards after catch that Smith likes to draw up. So one of the things that I wanted to pull up, the yards per reception last year for Hayden Hurst were 10.2. He had a catch rate, like I said, of 63%. And let's see. Yep. And the average cushion, so the target separation that Hayden Hurst had was, 1.65, per route. So he had almost 2 full yards on his catchable targets, when he got the ball. So he's good at separating. Same thing that I believe Kyle Pitts is going to show, that he's good at separating. And all this is going to benefit, this offense going forward. Now, I bring up all this to then bring up a controversial topic. And if you've stuck with me to the end of this, I expect the comments to really kind of go off the rails here. If happens what I think could happen, and what I think the potential happening, this really could end up bringing up a very interesting conversation after the end of next season, whether you extend Calvin Ridley or not. And what I mean by that is, I really feel like these guys, maybe not this year, but a potential of next year or going forward, I really feel like these guys could start to recreate what New England had back in 2011 with the mismatch nightmare of Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez. Both those guys, Gronkowski in that year was, I think, over 1,300 yards, and Hernandez was close to 1,000 yards. Like, in Tennessee, Arthur Smith focused his offense and his game plans and stuff around his best player, which was Derrick Henry, as he should have. Here, he doesn't have Derrick Henry. He has some serviceable running backs that we'll get into later on in the offseason. He has Calvin Ridley, but what he just did was spent a fourth overall pick on a tight end. So you're going to start to really funnel that offense through that tight end, kind of like what they do up there in Kansas City. And I think it would be foolish to just discount and throw away what Hayden Hurst brings to the table, especially if you start to get into the money side of it. Calvin Ridley is going to cost you a good bit of money. And you got plenty of other guys that you're going to have to sign, or you may want to sign, whether it's Fourier, Luakon, A.J. Terrell, Michael Walker, the list goes on, right? Or whatever free agents that you might want to bring in next year. So if what you can do is start funneling your offense through these tight ends, you may free up the need, per se, to have a dominant number one wide receiver. Like, if Tajay Sharp comes in and proves that he's more than serviceable, same thing with Olamide Zaccheaus, Russell Gage, Christian Blake. You can name all these other guys who are serviceable receivers, right? If you get like a receiver by rotation, like your X receiver, your wide out by rotation, but you're funneling, you're funneling your offense through the tight ends and through whoever the running back is, you may not necessarily be wanting to shell out 18, 19, $20 million a year for Calvin Ridley. So that's just something to think on. I'm not advocating for not keeping Calvin Ridley. I'm just saying it poses an interesting scenario, an interesting situation where you could potentially let Calvin Ridley play out his fifth-year option next year and then franchise tag him, right? So now you're not committing a ton of money to a wideout for a long term. Like, I don't know exactly what that would look like cap-wise, but it's an interesting thought. If Kyle Pitts comes on and turns into the next Travis Kelce or the next Rob Gronkowski, as a lot of people are projecting, and through that you start dominating with a two tight end set, Hayden Hurst is going to cost you a lot less than Calvin Ridley. So it's just something to think about, in my opinion. I'm not saying it's what you should do. I'm just saying it's an interesting thought. It's something to keep in the back of your mind. If this year goes well, you could probably sign Hayden Hurst to peanuts compared to what Calvin Ridley is going to cost you. And if you can start getting some production because of everybody focusing on Kyle Pitts or Hayden Hurst even, you could then start to have some, have a guy like a Frank Darby who is out there to basically just run go routes and catch a deep ball. It's just a thought. And some people talk about, we've brought it up before, how, Matt Ryan, he takes a little while to get used to, a target, used to a receiver. I don't know, man. First year with Hayden Hurst, and you're talking about 6 touchdowns and almost 600 yards and 56 receptions. That's pretty good for a tight end in a dirt cutter scheme. So I'll really be interested to see just how quickly he gets on page with Kyle Pitts, and if we can get somewhere in the tune of 700-800 yards with close to double-digit touchdowns. So those are my opinions on the two tight end set. I hope that I have laid my case out to y'all. I think that it is something that Arthur Smith is going to build this offense around, especially this year. And I think if Hayden takes off, then it'll be something that they keep going with, because the success rate of passing out of a 12 personnel is only getting better. So that's yet another way to counteract a nickel defense, is by putting a bigger body tight end on a corner or on a linebacker. So anyway, those are my opinions. As always, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Grim1128. You can catch us on Patreon if that's something you're interested in. Get involved in the group chat. Get access to monthly videos that nobody else gets to see. So it's real fun there. It's probably one of the only things that I'll push as far as merchandise kind of thing goes, because I think there's some value there. But you can always catch us live on Wednesdays. And yeah, that's it. And as always, Falcons fans, rise up.